Today I'm going to give you a brief overview of an introduction to crime and some key terms you're going to need to know. So first, what do we rely on in order to tell us what kind of crimes are being committed and how many crimes are going or have been committed in a certain area? And what we rely on is the Uniform Crime Reports. It's an index of crimes which usually pertain to murder, rape, robbery, and assault. And it also contains property crimes like burglary, theft, motor vehicle theft, and arson. However, the only way we actually know about these crimes is because they have to be reported, which sometimes skews the data because not all crimes are actually reported to the police department. Another form that we get our criminal reports from is from the National Crime Victimization Survey, which is a survey that surveys about 49,000 households, and it allows individuals who maybe had a crime committed against them to report that crime. So this report is nice because it shows unreported crimes and reported crimes. However, there's no way of checking if the information is actually valid. So it may not be truthful. So who is committing these crimes? You might find some of these statistics a little interesting. So 60% of all violent crimes are actually committed by males under the age of 25. And males commit about 90% of all violent crimes. And of the males in jail, they account 84% of all people in jail account for these crimes and are of the male gender. Many males suffer from abuse, lack of parental supervision, lack of education, and job skills, and those are the reasons why they turn to crime. So those are the areas that they lack, and they usually see no other opportunity than turning to crime. Youth gang violence accounts for much of the crime as well committed. So some classifications of offenses. So you have felonies. A felony is something that can be, your punishment could be death, or it could be a long time in prison. So some examples of felonies are murder, manslaughter, rape, sodomy. I hope we know what this is. You can look it up if you don't. I feel a little uncomfortable explaining that one. Mayhem is where basically you disfigure someone. Robbery, arson, burglary, and larceny. So you're going to hear these terms later in this presentation when I go into depth with what's the difference between robbery and burglary and what's the difference between larceny and burglary. So you'll find those out in a little bit. And a misdemeanor is just something that's punished by a fine or time in the local jail. So it's basically all other crimes. So you have your felonies, which you could die for and serve a lifetime in prison, and you have your misdemeanors, which are more like speeding, little incidences that you could be fined and you could even serve some time in jail. So murder, there's different types of murder. First degree murder must include the following. So it must have malice of aforethought, which basically means you have the intent of killing someone. You already knew that your actions would lead to death. So you also have to be deliberate. So it's done with a cool mind. You didn't go in there, you didn't get in a heated debate with the person. You went there with the intent to kill them. You had time to think about it. You had time to cool off. It was premeditated. You thought about how you were going to do it, what you were maybe going to do after. So you reflected on the murder actually before committing the crime. So in order to convict someone of first-degree murder, you must prove these three things. So malice, deliberate, and premeditated. So second-degree murder, you still have to prove malice. So you still have to have the intent, but you don't need the deliberation and you don't need the premeditation. Okay? So you have felony murder, which is done while a person is committing a different felony. So you just saw a whole list of different felonies that they could be doing while they're trying to kill someone. So a first-degree felony, if murder is committed with, would be robbery, rape, arson, and burglary. That's first-degree felony. So you went to rob someone and you shot them. You intended to rob that person. You knew that could happen potentially. You came with the weapon on you. So you were second degree with the felony murder. So second degree felony is killing committed with another type of crime. So it could be any other type of crime. So first degree felony murder is if it's one of these four items, so robbery, rape, arson, or burglary come with the murder. And second degree felony murder is where it's committed with another crime. So murder continued. You have voluntary manslaughter. So it's killing done without that malice of aforethought. So you didn't intend on killing the person, but they still did die. So you were either provoked by the victim, you got in a heated debate, and the end result was that individual died. This is considered sometimes second-degree murder. It's an act done in the heat of anger, and there wasn't time to cool off. So involuntary manslaughter, so unintended killing that takes place during a crime that isn't a felony. The other ones, the felony, first degree, and second degree murder, were during felonies. This one is more like you're driving your car and you're driving recklessly and someone dies in your car because of the way you were driving it, or maybe you were under the influence and you didn't intend to kill them, but you still did, and that's called involuntary manslaughter. So if you are found guilty of criminal negligence, that's what you could be charged with. So it's a reckless act without reasonable caution and putting someone else's life at risk. So basically homicide that pertains to a vehicle. I was just talking about this. So killing from an automobile when the driver is criminally negligent. So maybe they're speeding, they're intoxicated, or under the influence of some type of drug. Those are all instances when you could be found guilty of homicide. You didn't intend to kill the individual like murder, but you did end up killing the individual. So actual intent, so you consciously caused another's death. So maybe you drove like that because you did want to harm that individual. It's a little harder to prove that. Or implied intent. You knew that the actions you were taking, like drinking or being under the influence, could or have been known to result in death or great bodily harm. So stealing. So moving away from the idea of murder. So stealing. So it's a street crime if it's burglary or mugging or theft. So basically you ran up to someone, you stole their purse from them. Those are examples of street crime. White collar crimes usually are a more educated population commit white collar crimes. It's bank fraud, or when you're selling worthless stocks or bonds, or you're illegally using mortgage schemes. So kinds of stealing, you have larceny or theft. You have illegally taking someone else's property with the intention of never giving it back. So categories of theft, you have grand theft, which is stealing property over a certain amount, usually around $400, and then you have petty theft, which is basically you stole items that were less than $400. So difference between burglary and robbery. So when you think of theft, it can be called larceny or theft. Burglary and robbery do have differences. Burglary is the unlawful entry into any building with the intent to steal or commit a felony. So burglary is you have to enter a dwelling. You have to enter a building. Whereas robbery is you can just do it to an individual. It can be a person that you're stealing from, and you usually have some type of threat of violence. So when you mug someone or do something like that's just a street crime, maybe that individual didn't always feel the threat of violence, but when you do robbery, there is a threat of violence that exists. In armed robbery, definitely there's a threat of violence that exists. You either used a dangerous weapon or implied that you had a dangerous weapon that you were going to use if that person didn't hand over their belongings. So other forms of stealing, you have embezzlement. So it's when you're embezzling money into a company. It's usually when people take a property that they've been entrusted with and they are taking someone's money. So for some of you who saw the movie Tower Heist, it's like when the employees were giving the owner of the hotel their money and he was supposed to be investing it for his retirement, and he was embezzling the money. Fraud, which is where you're knowingly misrepresenting a fact to get the property from someone. Or extortion, where you offer a threat of money or items if they're not handed over. And you can also be found guilty if you are receiving stolen property. So if you buy something that came off the black market, you yourself, if you knew it was probably illegally obtained could be held accountable. So if you go to New York and you do buy a Coach bag and you buy it for $20 and you know it's real, you probably know it comes from the black market because you know those bags cost a lot more than what that individual was charging. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview of what the different types of murder are, what the different types of robbery and theft are, and what the different types of stealing are. So hopefully that gave you a brief overview also of the differences between felonies and misdemeanors.